Hi, it's Stuart here from Fiscal Artisans. In this video, I'm going to walk you through Australia's new streaming content rules, what has changed, which platforms are affected, and what this means for you if you work in or with the Australian film and TV industry. As always, the goal is to go beyond the headlines and focus on what the numbers actually mean for your business. On 27th of November 2025, Parliament passed a new Australian content requirement for subscription video on demand services, the big streamers. The rules come into effect on 1st of January 2026. Importantly, they don't just talk about having a certain number of Australian shows. They set a minimum level of money that the major platforms must invest every year in new Australian stories. So, who is actually covered? A service is in scope of the legislation if it has at least 1 million paying Australian subscribers and it offers content in the key genres: drama, children's, documentary, arts, or educational programs. In practice, that means services like Netflix, Amazon Prime Video, Disney Plus, Stan, Paramount, Apple TV, and Binge. They all meet the subscriber test and they all carry eligible content. You'll also see platforms like Kayo on the market with more than 1 million subscribers. But because Kayo is almost entirely sport and sport doesn't count as an eligible genre, the new rules bite very differently there. So let's simplify the obligations. Each major streaming service must spend each year on new eligible Australian programs, either 10% of what it spends on programs in Australia or 7.5% of the revenue it earns from Australian subscribers. To count towards that target, a program must be in an eligible genre, that is, as we said, drama, children's, documentary, arts or educational, and also new and genuinely Australian under the existing creative control test or as an official co-production. Spending on sport, news, current affairs, and advertising does not help a platform meet its obligations. Most reality and light entertainment shows also sit outside the net unless ACMA decides that they really are arts or educational content. ACMA's most recent report shows that the major streamers already spend several $100 million a year on Australian and Australian-related content. The government's modelling for the new law estimates that, across all the big services, the obligation will require around $175 to $200 million per year on new eligible Australian content, i.e. adults drama, children's content, documentaries, plus smaller amounts likely in arts and educational programming. In other words, this law doesn't create all of this spending from scratch. Instead, it sets a floor roughly at the level what the platforms have been doing on average in recent years and ties that floor to future revenue growth. From a planning perspective, that's powerful. It takes volatile discretionary budgets and turns them into a regulated minimum. They can't drop what they're spending. Now, we can't see each platform's exact internal accounting, but we can build a sensible picture using subscriber share and the government's totals. If we treat the combined minimum as roughly $190 million per year and allocate that by Australian subscription shares, we get an indicative annual envelopes that might look like this. Netflix, somewhere around $55 to $60 million a year required. Amazon Prime, around $45 to $50 million. Disney Plus currently around $30 million. Stan, around 20 to 25 million. Paramount Plus, around 15 to 20 million. And Binge, around 10 to 15 million. Now, these are not official quotas. They're a way of sizing the opportunity. Tens of millions of dollars per platform per year, focused specifically on Australian projects. Now, what about Foxtel? Foxtel's position is a little bit different because it operates both as a traditional pay TV and a streaming brand. On the linear pay TV side, Foxtel's drama channels are already subject to the new eligible drama expenditure scheme. That requires at least 10% of drama channel program spend to go into new Australian drama, and the sector is currently sitting above that minimum. On the streaming side, Binge is treated like any other major SVOD. It will need to meet its own 7.5 to 10% obligation on eligible Australian content, just like Netflix or Stan. Foxtel Go is essentially a mirror of the broadcast channels, and the parliamentary material points to that type of service as something ACMA can exempt and probably will exempt because the underlying broadcast service already has content regulation. As we said, Kayo Sports has more than 1 million subscribers, but its content is almost entirely sport. Sport does not count towards the new quota. So any obligations there would need to be met through non-sport content, or ACMA may treat it as a special case. The practical takeaway is that the Foxtel Group will keep commissioning Australian drama and factual titles. They have to, under both the NEDE and new streaming rules, but sports rights spending remains in a different bucket. Now, within the eligible spend, obviously not all genres are equal. Existing data shows that adult drama currently absorbs the majority of Australian content spend on the streaming services. Children's content and documentaries are smaller, but still meaningful. As a working rule of thumb, you can think of the eligible spending currently breaking down roughly as about 60 to 70% into adult drama, that's series, features, and high-end narrative comedy. 10 to 15% into children's content, 15 to 20% into documentaries and factual programs, and 5 to 10% into arts and educational programming. Now, that mix may evolve over time, but if you are developing projects that sit in those categories, especially drama and premium factual, you are aligning yourself with where the regulated money has to land. Now, what does all of this mean for your business? First, you can treat this as a more predictable floor under the demand for premium Australian commissions. The streamers can still choose where to spend. They are not forced to buy any particular project, but they cannot ignore Australian content altogether. Second, clearly eligible drama, children's and documentary projects will carry strategic value for the platforms. If your project helps a service to meet its 7.5 to 10% obligation and also fits their brand, it's simply easier for an executive there to say yes. Now, third, there is a strong finance story. The new quota-driven spending sits alongside the producer offset, location offsets, Screen Australia and state agency funding. Used together, these tools can support more robust budgets and more resilient production companies. Finally, Foxtel and Binge remain important commissioning centres. Between NEDE and the new SVOD obligations, they have every reason to maintain a viable slate of Australian drama and factual content across both linear and on-demand platforms. Now, to turn this into a practical opportunity, here are some actions that I would suggest. Obviously, firstly, audit your slate. Identify which projects clearly meet the eligibility rules and which platforms they best suit. Shape your pitches. Talk explicitly about how your project helps a platform meet its Australian content obligation and has scope for broader global viewing as well, i.e. design locally but think globally. Design your finance plans around the new floor. Combine the quota-driven streamer spend with offsets and agency funding. Remember, $500,000 plus of eligible Australian expenditure provides scope for Screen Australia's certification and eligibility for tax rebates, and that can be crucial in the funding of any program. Tighten your documentation. Make sure your Australian creative control and spend can be demonstrated clearly on paper. Model your different scenarios. What's your best case, your base case, and your low case, so you understand your risk and opportunities. Now, if you'd like help with any of this, from modelling slate scenarios, reviewing finance structures, to building client-ready reports on the likely impact of these rules, that's exactly what we can do here at Fiscal Artisans for you. Thanks for watching, and as always, if you want to go beyond the numbers, get in touch with us here at Fiscal Artisans. Thank you.